He had money, cars, mansions, but in a quiet doctor's office, he heard the one thing no millionaire ever wants to hear: "You have 45 days to live." The room was sterile, too quiet, and the hum of the fluorescent light above him felt louder than it should. Oliver Dalton, a man whose name adorned skyscrapers and charity wings, sat motionless in a leather chair. Across from him, the doctor hesitated just a second too long before saying the words, "Terminal cancer, no treatment. 45 days, maybe 50 if God felt generous." He didn't cry, he didn't argue, he just nodded, stood up, and left. The ride home was silent. No one to call, no family waiting, no partner to hold his hand while the world shifted beneath him. For a man who once negotiated billion-dollar deals, he'd never felt so small, so empty. That night, he wandered the halls of his estate. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, but the house, once a symbol of power, now felt more like a mausoleum. His legacy, just numbers in an account. Who would remember the man? Then, at 3:17 a.m., with the TV on mute and a news segment playing silently, something strange happened. A story about 5 brothers separated by the system: foster homes, failed adoptions, kids no one wanted. Oliver stared. Something in their eyes cracked open, something in his. Before the sun came up, he made the first of many calls. No one understood what he was doing. Not the court, not his lawyer, not even the boys. But the next 45 days would rewrite the meaning of family, legacy, and even life itself. Oliver Dalton's mornings used to be choreographed like a Broadway production. The blinds would rise automatically at 7 a.m., revealing the ocean through glass walls. The chef would deliver a perfectly poached egg on a silver tray. The espresso machine hissed like it had something to prove. But today, none of it mattered. He sat in his dining room, untouched coffee going cold beside a half-eaten croissant. The sea sparkled outside, but his eyes didn't move. He just stared, one hand resting loosely around the newspaper he hadn't opened. For a man who used to devour headlines, he had no appetite for food or information. The doctor's voice played on repeat in his head. "I'm sorry, Oliver. You have 6 weeks, maybe less." The way she had said it, almost apologetically, like she hated to deliver news that couldn't be undone. He hadn't asked questions. He didn't want second opinions. Something inside him already knew it was true. The strange thing, he didn't feel fear, not exactly. It was more like dislocation, as if the gears of his life had suddenly slipped, and he was watching someone else's story unfold. He thought about the will, the foundations, the letters his lawyer had prepared to be opened after his death. Every plan accounted for, and still, a deep gnawing void made his chest feel like it was caving in. It hit him hardest when he realized no one would miss his laugh. Not really. No one would hold his hand at the end. He had built an empire, and no one to inherit it. His wealth would vanish into boardroom handshakes and charitable plaques. He stood suddenly, pushing the chair back hard enough to make the butler flinch in the hallway. "Cancel everything today," he said, his voice low but steady. Everything. He didn't know what he was going to do. Not yet. But dying quietly, that wouldn't be it. As Oliver walked into his study to think, he passed the TV and paused. A flicker of 5 young faces appeared on screen. He reached for the remote and froze, heart thudding for the first time in days. Tyler knew better than to unpack. It didn't matter how many drawers the social worker told him were his now, none of it ever lasted. He was 14 and had cycled through 12 homes in 6 years. That kind of math leaves scars you don't show in school photos. His brothers were scattered. Lucas, the second oldest at 12, was in a group home 2 towns over, sharing space with kids who'd seen worse than most adults could handle. Jamie, just 10, had been placed with a couple in rural Pennsylvania who only seemed interested in his quiet temperament. Chris, 8, already had a nervous habit of pulling at his earlobe, one he'd developed after their mother disappeared. And Ben, the baby, only 6, barely remembered his brothers' faces, let alone their names. They'd been separated for their own good, or so the court had said. Better chances of placement, they claimed. Better odds at a normal life if they weren't seen as a package deal. But what no one admitted out loud was simple. 5 boys, one after another, no parents. A messy file full of trauma. It was too much for most people. On this particular morning, Tyler was staring out a cracked window in another temporary room. watching the trees bend under a cold spring wind. He wondered if his brothers were also looking at the same sky. He wondered if they even remembered his voice. He didn't cry anymore. That ended around age 10. At that moment, down the hall, the foster mother called for him. Someone wanted to talk to him. He dragged his feet as usual, assuming it was another caseworker, another evaluation, another promise with an expiration date. But on the screen was a man in a dark suit. Older, silver hair, kind eyes that didn't quite match the sharpness of his jawline. "Tyler," he said, pausing as if trying to find the right words. "I'm Oliver Dalton. I'd like to meet you, and your brothers, all 5 of you, together." Tyler blinked. His first instinct was to laugh. No one ever wanted all of them. But then Oliver added something that made him stop cold. "I don't have much time, son, and I think maybe, just maybe, you and I could help each other out." Tyler didn't know what he meant, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't look away. Oliver sat uncomfortably on the cold wooden bench outside the juvenile court. His attorney, a polished man named Martin with too much gel in his hair, was already muttering warnings. "They're going to think you're unstable," he whispered. "No history with children. No long-term prognosis. They'll ask what happens to the boys when you die." Oliver didn't answer. He just stared at the closed courtroom door, his thoughts already several miles ahead. In 5 different places where 5 different boys were probably wondering if this was another cruel joke. Inside, the room was half empty, but the air buzzed with quiet judgment. A judge in her 50s with wireframe glasses glanced at the stack of papers before her like they were props in a tragic play she'd seen before. Across the aisle, a social worker named Teresa folded her arms, skeptical. Before a single word was spoken, "Mr. Dalton," the judge began, "why, exactly, do you want to adopt these 5 boys?" Oliver stood slowly. His voice was clear, though something cracked faintly at the edges. "Because no one else has. Because they've been passed around like afterthoughts. Because I've spent a lifetime building things that don't love me back, and I'd like to spend what time I have left building something that does." The room was still. Teresa leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "With all due respect, sir, love isn't enough. These boys have been through trauma. They need stability. They need structure. And I have a terminal diagnosis." Oliver cut in. "Yes, 45 days, if I'm lucky. But I'm not here asking for a lifetime. I'm offering them one. Together." No one spoke. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't sensible. And yet, something about the rawness in his voice, the way he didn't sugarcoat the odds, made the judge pause. After a long silence, she finally said, "We'll start with supervised visitation. 1 week, all 5, together. After that, we'll reassess." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Outside, as Oliver stepped into the spring air, Martin caught up to him, shaking his head. "This is madness," he muttered. Oliver looked down the courthouse steps. "Then let it be a beautiful kind of madness." He didn't see the camera crew waiting across the street, didn't know that the story had already leaked. But across town, in 5 different rooms, 5 different boys were just being told they'd be seeing each other again, and staying in a mansion. One of them asked, "What's the catch?" The caseworker didn't answer. The black SUV rolled up the winding driveway like it didn't belong. The mansion stood like a sleeping giant, tall, still too perfect. Tyler was the first to step out, trying to act unimpressed, but the way his eyes darted to the peaks of the roofline gave him away. Behind him, Lucas tugged nervously at his sleeves. Jamie clutched his sketchpad. Chris blinked like the sunlight was too much, and little Ben clung to a stuffed bear that smelled like every foster home he'd ever survived. Oliver waited on the front steps, hands in his pockets, trying not to look like a man counting down the days. "Hey boys," he said with a careful smile. "Welcome home, if you want it." None of them responded. Inside the house echoed with their hesitant footsteps. Marble floors, crystal light fixtures, a grand staircase that spiraled like something out of a movie. But instead of awe, the boys looked wary, like every step might trigger an alarm they couldn't see. Dinner was awkward. Oliver had asked the chef to make something kid-friendly, which resulted in an elaborate interpretation of cheeseburgers no child would recognize. Ben picked at his plate. Lucas didn't touch his. Jamie kept his head down, sketching quietly under the table. Afterward, Oliver tried to break the ice. He asked Tyler about school. He offered to show Chris the game room, He even asked if Ben wanted to see the koi pond, but it was Lucas who finally broke the silence. "My last foster dad said he'd keep us together too," he said, barely above a whisper. Then he sent Chris back the next week. Oliver swallowed hard. "I won't do that." Lucas stared straight at him. "You might not live long enough to." The words hit like a slap. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tyler stood up, grabbed his brother's hand, and led him upstairs without a word. That night, Oliver stood outside their shared bedroom door, listening to muffled voices. The boys were whispering, not arguing, not crying, just whispering, like they were trying to remember how to be close again. In the hallway, he closed his eyes. For the first time since the diagnosis, he felt something strange. He wanted to live, not for another yacht or deal, but to hear that whispering become laughter. Downstairs, his phone buzzed. A voicemail from his doctor. The results were ... unusual. The second morning was quieter, but not in a bad way. No slammed doors, no suspicious glares, just the clink of cereal bowls and the occasional cartoon laugh leaking from the living room. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something softer than survival. Oliver skipped his usual breakfast tray. Instead, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the edge of the kitchen counter while Chris recited dinosaur facts to Ben. Jamie was drawing again, a little less hidden now, and Lucas, though still guarded, asked if there was Wi-Fi. "Fast enough for Fortnite," Oliver said. Lucas smirked. It lasted 2 seconds, but it was a win. In the days that followed, the mansion started to feel less like a museum. Sticky fingerprints appeared on the glass doors. Crumbs trailed through the hallway. Someone put a smiley face sticker on a Rembrandt. Oliver didn't mind. He didn't even flinch when Ben accidentally dropped a lamp. He just knelt down beside him, picked up the pieces, and said, "Let's pretend this one wasn't my favorite." At night, the boys watched movies in the theater room, sometimes drifting off against each other like fallen dominoes. Oliver began, sleeping with his door open, just in case anyone needed him. But what shocked him most wasn't the joy. It was the way his body responded to it. He woke up on day 11 without chest pain for the first time in weeks. His hands, usually shaky from the medication, felt steady enough to tie his own shoelaces. When he went in for a routine checkup, his oncologist frowned at the charts, then at him. "Some of your markers have improved," she said, "not reversed. But they're not behaving the way we expected." Oliver just smiled. He didn't tell the boys about the appointment, didn't want to give them false hope. But that night, as they all stood around the kitchen island eating pizza straight from the box, Tyler looked up at him and said, "You don't look like you're dying." Oliver paused. Then he said, "Maybe I'm not yet." The room went quiet. Then Chris dropped his crust and said, "If you don't die, can we stay forever?" Oliver's heart squeezed. "I'll do everything I can." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was coming, but inside that house, for the first time, it felt like someone had opened a window. The knock on the door was sharp, 3 quick raps, impatient, like the person behind it had no intention of waiting. Oliver opened the door and froze. Standing there, in a tailored suit and rain-slicked hair, was Graham Dalton, his younger brother, estranged for more than 20 years. Same jawline, same piercing eyes, but colder, always colder. "Well," Graham said, brushing past him like it was still 1987, "I heard you've lost your mind." The boys were upstairs, thankfully, but Oliver could feel their curiosity drifting from the hallway above. He guided Graham into the study and shut the double doors behind them. "You shouldn't be here," Oliver said. "And yet, here I am. Your attorney called me something about changes to the estate, about 5 kids who aren't even blood." Oliver crossed his arms. "They're mine now. And that's all that matters." Graham scoffed. "You think the board's going to be okay with this? You think the trust's going to stay intact when they find out you've handed your fortune over to children you've known for 2 weeks? They're not getting my fortune," Oliver said. "They're getting a future. There's a difference." For a moment, the room was silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. Then Graham leaned in. "You think this little emotional redemption arc is going to undo who you were? You were ruthless," Oliver called. "Just like that," Oliver's jaw clenched. "That's exactly why I'm doing this." The door creaked behind them. Lucas had slipped in quietly, eyes wide, having heard just enough to feel unwelcome in a house that had finally started to feel safe. Oliver turned and saw him. "Lucas, wait." But the boy was already gone, running up the stairs, passing Tyler and Jamie, who stood frozen as they watched their new stability crack like old paint. That night, dinner was silent again. Oliver didn't eat, he just sat there, listening to the forks scrape plates, wondering if he'd just undone everything. With a single open door and in the guest room, Graham made a call. "I want the will reversed," he said, "before it's too late." Oliver collapsed in the hallway. It was early, just past sunrise, and he was on his way to make pancakes. He'd promised Ben he'd flip them the way real dads do, but halfway to the kitchen, his legs buckled. A sharp, crushing pain shot through his chest like a vice, closing too fast. Tyler was the first to find him. He screamed so loudly the others came running barefoot down the stairs, wide-eyed and breathless. Lucas called 911. Jamie clutched Ben like a life preserver. Chris stood frozen, lips trembling but silent. When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, efficiently, like people who'd seen this before. But to the boys, especially Tyler, it looked like the end. They didn't understand the wires, the monitors, the oxygen mask. All they saw was the man who said he wasn't dying, now being taken away. Graham didn't ride with them. He stood in the foyer, watching it all unfold with an expression that hovered between guilt and calculation. As the ambulance disappeared down the drive, he muttered under his breath, "Told you it wouldn't last." At the hospital, Oliver faded in and out. His vitals were unstable. The doctor's voice was serious but careful. "It's not a heart attack, but it's close. His body's under enormous strain. He shouldn't be under this kind of emotional load." Back at the house, the boys sat huddled on the couch, waiting for news. Tyler stared blankly at the TV, which was still playing some mindless cartoon. No one was watching. Lucas stood up suddenly. "We need to go to the hospital." Jamie looked up, surprised. "They said we had to wait." "I don't care," Lucas said. "If he dies and we're not there," he couldn't finish the sentence. They didn't pact. They didn't ask permission. They just left 5 boys in borrowed jackets, walking down the long driveway toward the edge of the property, toward the city lights in the distance. They didn't know how they'd get there. They just knew they had to try. In a sterile hospital room, Oliver opened his eyes slowly. His doctor was standing there, holding the latest scan. Something in her face had changed. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Your scans, they're stabilizing." But Oliver didn't care about the data. He looked past her, toward the window, and whispered one word, "Where are they?" The hospital room was dim, lit only by the pale blue glow of machines and the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Oliver lay propped up slightly, eyes half closed, 4 lines snaking from his arms, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "I need to speak to my lawyer," he said. Now. Martin arrived within the hour, briefcase in hand, irritation masked behind professional concern. "Oliver, you should be resting." "No, we're rewriting the will," Martin sighed. "Again, this time, it's final." The lawyer opened his laptop reluctantly, preparing to dictate, but Oliver shook his head. "No. No more language like disbursement of assets or conditional trust clauses. Just write what I say." Martin blinked, then nodded. Oliver spoke slowly. "I leave everything not because they're blood, or because it makes sense on paper, but because they gave me something I never earned. Forgiveness, laughter, a reason to live for more than headlines. To Tyler, my anchor. To Lucas, my mirror. To Jamie, my soul. To Chris, my light. To Ben, my heart." The lawyer's fingers paused over the keyboard. "And what of your brother?" he asked quietly. Oliver stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Graham spent his life guarding what he thought he was owed. But these boys, they gave freely, without asking for anything. That's what deserves to be honored. Martin closed the laptop. "It's done." Outside the hospital, the boys had made it as far as the main road before a volunteer nurse spotted them and called it in. By the time they reached the hospital lobby, they were cold, exhausted but determined. A nurse brought them upstairs in pairs. No red tape, no paperwork, just 5 boys squeezing around a hospital bed, where Oliver lay smiling, eyes rimmed with tears. "I thought I told you to stay home," he whispered. Lucas climbed onto the edge of the bed. "We don't do that anymore. We stay." Oliver nodded, unable to speak. He reached out, resting one hand over Ben's small fingers. "I signed something today," he finally said. "Something for after I'm gone." Tyler looked away. "Don't talk like that," but Oliver shook his head. "It's not about death, it's about what lives after. And that is you." Jamie took Oliver's other hand, and for the first time, the boys, who once couldn't be in the same room without flinching, sat together, touching, trusting. Home. Outside, the storm had passed. The world was supposed to end that morning. 40-5 days. That's what Oliver had been given. 45 days to live, to breathe, to matter. But as the sun rose on day 46, he woke up in his own bed. No hospital monitors, no tubes, just sunlight spilling through the window and the faint scent of waffles wafting from downstairs. He was alive. He lay still for a long time, listening. Somewhere below, someone was arguing about syrup, someone else was humming, and someone, probably Ben, was singing off-key. Oliver sat up. He expected pain, but it didn't come. He stood, walked. His legs were thin, but strong enough. He made it down the stairs, one slow step at a time, until he reached the kitchen. All 5 boys turned to him in shock. "Thought you were sleeping," Tyler said. Oliver shrugged. "Guess I overslept." Lucas blinked. "Is it over?" "I don't know," Oliver said. "But I know it's not the end." That day, the story broke. A local reporter who had caught wind of the adoption posted a piece titled "The Millionaire Who Chose Family Over Fortune." It went viral. By sundown, news crews were camped outside the gates, wanting to see the man who had defied death through love. But Oliver didn't give interviews. He didn't need applause. Instead, he sat on the back patio with his boys, watching Chris teach Ben how to skip stones. Jamie was sketching them, quietly, the way he always did. Tyler and Lucas were playing chess on a blanket. No one noticed when Oliver wiped a tear from his cheek. The doctors would later say they had no explanation. Maybe it was misdiagnosed, they muttered. Maybe a 1 in a million anomaly. But Oliver knew better. It wasn't a cure, it was a choice. He hadn't been saved by science. He'd been saved by love, messy, noisy, unexpected love. And now, every day after was a bonus. If this story moved you, you're not alone. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what part of Oliver's journey touched your heart the most? Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. And don't forget, sometimes, family isn't what you're born into, it's what you choose when it matters most.